Hello and welcome to Pod Street, the podcast from Writing WA, where we talk to creatives from all kinds of backgrounds within the literary sector and unpack what they do and why. I'm Laurie Steep, Partnerships and Development Manager for Writing WA, and tonight's guest is two-time Tin Duck Award winner and Aurealis Award and Ditmar Award finalist, Amanda Bridgeman. Welcome, Amanda.
Thanks for having me, Laurie. It's great to be here.
It's amazing. I'm really excited to have you here. You're the author of, objectively from my point of view, a ridiculous number of books across all kinds of different series and properties, including the Aurora and the Salvation series of books. Talk me through, I guess, your fiction output in a nutshell, like a summary of the worlds you've explored thus far and why.
Summary of my fiction output. So I started my career on the Aurora series, which is a space opera and military sci-fi. Definitely not on the hard sci-fi side. Some people pick up the books thinking they're going to be hard sci-fi. They're not. And I had 5 books written before I got picked up by Momentum Books, who were at the time the digital imprint of Pan Macmillan Australia.
I remember them, absolutely. I was in their offices once. Long story.
Oh, right. Yeah, they were great. But after the 5 years, Pan Macmillan decided to close them down and absorb into Pan Macmillan. And I still had another book on contract with them, book 6 in this series. And when they closed their doors, I thought the world had ended because I hadn't finished this series, and trying to get another publisher to pick up a series that's already 5 books deep is hard. And the publisher there recommended that I get the rights back and self-publish. So that's what I did with that series. And since then, I've released books 6, 7, and 8. And hopefully that series is going to finish on book 9. And I've self-published another standalone book called The Time of the Stripes, which is I kind of describe it as The Leftovers meets The Lord of the Flies.
Wow.
So we've got that one. We've got, what else have I got? So I self-published that one.
Yeah.
And I've also self-published a novella trilogy last year, which was in the Spud Compton series, and that's sci-fi horror, but with some lightheartedness in there as well.
Okay.
And my 2 books with Angry Robot Books in the UK, The Subjugate and The Sensation, they are a near-future crime thriller, and that's currently being developed for TV.
Yep. So
I've had great success with that. And I've also done a bunch of what's called media tie-in writing. And that's where I've done a short story and a novel for Marvel X-Men in the Marvel X-Men universe. I've also done a short story in the Warhammer 40K universe. I have also written the very first novel based on the board game Pandemic.
Yes, come through.
Yeah, so that was quite exciting to get to write the very first novel based on the game. Unfortunately, this all happened in 2019 before the pandemic hit. That's an interesting story, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Talk about bad luck and bad timing.
From a process point of view, how do you write your book? So you're working on more than one at any given time, or is that a linear process, what you've just described to me? Or do you just literally have a number of projects pending on what's happening in your writing career at any given time?
I generally have a few different projects on the go at any one time, but they'll be at different stages of development. So some will just be ideas. The general sort of journey for me writing a story is I'll work on it basically in my head for years while I'm developing characters and scenes and stuff. And when I feel like I've got enough of the story worked out, I'll then start to write some ideas down. And normally I will write my novels in a linear fashion, and I will basically just start at the start. I'll know all the key scenes in my head, and I've just got to figure out as I write how to get from one key scene to the next. And that's when all the subplots tend to develop that way.
Amazing. And when did you know this was what you were going to do? Like, when did you realize, okay, I'm going to create worlds. I don't necessarily have some of the restrictions other people might have. I just know I want to exist in the world of drama and bring that to.
I used to actually write books as a teenager. I used to write what I called the movies in my head as novels, because back then I had no idea how to write a screenplay.
Yeah.
Whereas now I write screenplays as well. But so I've always had a very active imagination. I think it's I grew up with 3 older brothers. And so naturally the boys didn't want to sit there and play dolls with me. So I used to play dolls on my own. And I think that really fostered a really active imagination. And yeah, as a teen, I was just a huge movie fan and movie head. So I started writing the movies in my head as novels. And then I went to university and studied film and television. And then I kind of went away from all of that stuff for a long time. Well, I say I went away from it. I left university quite a bit disillusioned at my chances of making it in the screen industry, because especially in Perth, it's just hard to crack. So so I myself stepped away from creating, but my brothers were in a band, my ex-boyfriend was in a band, and so I spent a lot of my 20s going to gigs and watching everyone else be creative and chasing their dreams. And it wasn't until my late 20s that I moved to London and I started doing film and TV extra work, and that just kind of reinvigorated the spark for me. And so when I came back to Australia, I started writing, and that's kind of, I finally started, living my life really in my late 20s, early 30s.
But the Aurora series was your first, you said? That was the first series you wrote? Okay, with that.
Yep.
So how do you go from, because am I right, is that working with Joel Naum and Treasure? Were they the people who were at Momentum?
Yeah, Joel, yep, he was my publisher, yep.
Joel Naum, wonderful. So is that where you get your first exposure to the idea of working on screenplays and things like that? Or is it because of your film studies that you were aware that that was an option that maybe some writers who study lit might not consider?
Yeah, I think because that was what I had intended to do, was be involved in the film industry. And then I started writing, and then I kind of just had this, aha moment that I'd come full circle. I was just writing one day and I thought, well, this is what I used to do as a teenager. I've actually, like, years later, I've gone off on this long journey, and now I've come back and I'm back to writing again. Maybe this is what I was supposed to do this whole time.
Yes.
I thought I wanted to do film, but maybe it was this. But since then, I've still been wanting to scratch that itch. So I started getting back into screenwriting. So now I'm kind of juggling short stories and novels and screenplays, and possibly branching into yet another thing, which I can't really talk about yet.
All right, but do you have pre-existing networks to tap in that regard? Because I guess that's the other question is...
Oh, no.
No. So how you just wrote the screenplay and was like, I'm going to work out how I get this towards that way? And in terms of your TV, you've also been in TV writing rooms and stuff. How did that start? Did you just reach out to someone in production and they were like, sure?
No. In terms of me screenwriting, I've always been very good at hunting for opportunities and putting myself out there. When I first started my writing career, I spent a lot of money flying interstate to attend conventions. There's Conflux in Canberra, there's Continuum in Melbourne, there's GenreCon. I used to go to all of them and spend a lot of money to go there, meet people, and kind of I built up contacts, but also just going to these conventions and listening to writers' panels was just, you can't put a price on that for the advice you can get from them and learning. So with that, I did a similar thing with screenwriting in that, I was following Screen West, and whenever they had a program out, I'd apply for programs. I got into a Pinnacles screenplay boot camp, which helped me really develop a feature that I had. And that went on to be optioned. It's now out of option, but it was optioned for a while, so that was quite exciting. So yeah, I've basically just in between the gaps of my day job and the novel career, I've been had to retrain myself in screenwriting. And there's plenty of blogs, there's plenty of podcasts. It's just if you really want it, all the information and the training that you need is out there. You just have to have the discipline and the sort of the nous to get out there and find it.
So what's the difference then in a TV writing space as opposed to the prose writing space? I'm guessing the obvious difference is a collaborative process. Like you've done both. So I'm curious as to whether the form calls you or that you're a writer at the broadest sense. So anything that's writing and that gets you further along on that journey and in that career is what you chase. Or do you have a format?
Yeah. I like creating stories. So and worlds, and some people say this thing that, oh, if no one was going to read another word I wrote, I would still write anyway. But I don't know if I would, because I write to entertain people.
Yeah.
If I don't have an audience, for me, it's kind of like, what's the point? So I write to entertain, I write for an audience, and it's all stories start the same way, whether it's a screenplay or whether it's a novel. It's because even with screenplays, like even if you're going to develop a TV show, you would normally work up a TV pilot and a pitch deck yourself before you get a producer on board. Then you'd go into a writer's room with a bunch of other writers to flesh out the series. But even with a novel, as you write that story on your own, but then you do work with a publisher and you do work with an editor and even marketers to get the story across. So they all start with you in your room writing, but they're all to varying degrees quite communal in the end product, really.
I think you're probably just closer to that realization than many writers, that by literally having outward-facing people who will give you feedback on that as part of that process. Because, it struck me, I did a writing workshop for Margaret River Readers and Writers Festival a couple of weeks ago. And one of the exercises I got them to do was to be publishers. So they were a specific publishing house. And then I'd give them a published work from a different publishing house and say, would you publish this book? If you're that publishing house and you know what you value and what your ideas of what great fiction is, would that make your annual list? And I hope it was helpful. I know for me it was helpful just to think about it, that on some level, you're right, you've got your creative output, but then it gets into a space where one can sort of rally against the accountability, but someone somewhere will be making a decision based on that work you've created. And so I'm personally quite... I don't even really know how that world operates, but I'm impressed by how you operate within that world. And I think about that. And maybe that's what also means that if the project needs it, you can kind of work within traditional publishing and self-publishing, because you're going to be able to spruik that and promote that and not have a panic attack like I might have if I was in that same position of the obligation of having to sell. I'm just being honest. Like that's not a judgment call at all.
No. There's a lot of people who are very clear about, if I can't get traditionally published, then I won't publish at all. And I was in a very lucky position when I did decide to self-publish, because I was 5 books into the Aurora series. I'd already built up an audience with the publisher.
Yeah.
So for me to just self-publish other books in that series, it was easy to do. I used the same cover designer. I used the same editor. I used all the same professionals. I just paid them instead of the publisher paying them.
Yeah.
And so it was the same product out there, and the readers were already there to come and buy the next books. And they followed me on to other stuff. But I have noticed that, because even though I primarily work in science fiction and thrillers, there's some readers who will follow you no matter what you write, and there's other readers who like the Aurora series, but they're not so much into the other stuff I write. Or you release a new series, you pick up new readers for that series, but they're not necessarily a fan of the Aurora series. So, and I've noticed if other names are escaping me now, but other big authors, I've seen them say the same thing, whereas, there'll be diehard fans of one series, then they'll release a different series with different characters, and the diehard fans of the first one aren't that big a fan of the second one, and it's just the way it is. So, sorry, I kind of went off on a bit of a tangent there.
Oh, that's okay. I mean, I guess it does open that interesting conversation, though, around standalones versus series too, and how viable the standalone is outside of lit in the modern world, really, because it's like a consumptive process now. Reading always has been, but it feels more profoundly so now, that people like that idea of a book coming out and another one coming out in a year's time and being able to follow that series through.
Yeah, I think it also depends what mood. Some people just want to have one and done. Sometimes they're like, oh, I don't have the energy to start a new series just yet, so they just want to read a standalone that they can get in and out of. But with self-publishing, it's a lot harder to sell a standalone than it is a series. Because if you've got a series, you can offer the first book for free to get as a reader magnet, they call it, to get people in, and then, if they're into that series, they'll buy the rest of the series, and it's just easier to market if you have a series. But with a standalone, like if you offer it free, well, then it's gone. There's nothing else. There's no tail for readers to jump on.
Yeah.
So you can still do it, but it's just, if you're going to self-publish, it's easier to work with a series.
And how do you manage editorial in those when you're going self-published versus traditionally pub? Do you have like a beta reader process? Is that how you work on the editorial side of things, or do you?
I used to when I first started out. Now I'm a lot more comfortable in the story, and I basically rely on my editors to do that feedback.
Yeah,
that's an editor's job to say, hey, you said their eyes were blue back there, but now they're green, or something like
an
that.
editor for that project as part of your standard process towards publication.
Yes, I always have a professional editor.
Yeah, I think
self-published stuff.
That is so imperative. Like, I think that's somewhere where some self-published authors miss the mark.
Yeah.
I remember I got a book one time, an ebook, and it said, it had a disclaimer at the front, and it said, I am not a professional writer. Please note there will be errors within this manuscript and stuff. And I thought, well, that's not going to work for me, because if someone came to my house to work on a table and said, I am not a carpenter, slice this in half and make a mess, I'd go, well, don't do it then. That's okay. So I really appreciate that. I can see the benefits and the setbacks of both. Like, I think I've had enough experience watching and talking to people who self-publish and also people with traditional publishing to know that it's hard, period. And so I think find ways to make it work for the writer in itself is an amazing thing.
And there's pros and cons to both, because even with traditional publishing, you have a lot less say in the covers. You have a lot less say in how it's marketed. When you self-publish, a book has no shelf life, really. You can run sales regularly throughout time for the next 20 years and still make money on that book. Yeah. Whereas with a traditional publisher, you kind of get your main window's the 3 months. It's the month leading up to publication, the month of publication, and the month after. And then they've got other authors they need to service. And so your book will still be there and available for the 20 years, but whether it's going to be regularly pushed. So sometimes it can be to that detriment. But that said, to start out with, a traditional publisher has a much larger audience and is a great springboard. And there's still a lot of snobbery around self-publishing. The amount of I've noticed it that, because I am traditionally published, you get a lot more respect than if I was just a self-publisher, even though I'm using, editors, professional cover designers, I'm doing all of that with the self-published stuff. But yeah, there's still a snobbery around it.
I think, and the balance of having had both experiences too. I know sometimes a self-published writer will come to me and say, I'm not getting the attention I thought I was going to get with my book, or I'm not getting reviews and things like that. And having come from a traditionally published background, that happens too, that a book gets lost in the crowd or it doesn't get promoted in certain places. So the sheer output of content, whatever realm you're in, it's just terrifying. Like there's so many
millions.
Just millions upon millions, just a silliness. So as you say, that kind of idea of the long tail stuff kicking in is a kind of leveler. Like it's pretty hard anyway, but you're utilizing other networks that have the same motivation, I guess, that you've got other self-published authors will support indie authors, and there's things like that. Whereas I think that I wouldn't necessarily say that always works in the traditional publishing sense. It's a little more cottaged, and each publisher or each agent is trying to represent their thing and say, look what we've done, and that can hold it back.
And even a lot of it rests in the hands with bookshop owners as well.
Of course.
Like some are really great, but then others, you know, I've been into so many bookstores in Perth alone, and a lot of them just aren't interested in talking to me or giving me shelf space. And it's like, but I'm traditionally published, like,
of course. Well,
so it's hard.
There's an interesting development. A colleague of mine, Emma Young, wrote about it the other day, where she read a book by a crime writer over in the East, and the book was 270 pages long. And the first 170 pages of the book was the novel or novella that they'd written. And the last 100 was the next book. Is that something you would ever consider, or does that take it into a different realm from product, entire book, and you promote things individually?
100 pages is a massive amount of
I feel like that too.
to get at the end of another book.
I think it just felt like a strange precedent to set up too. But then I guess I do exist outside of that world, but it's something that's crossed my mind. I remember watching some sort of speculative movies back in the day that didn't have any commercial stuff coming through. And I thought these movies are fascinating because they're missing one of the most obvious technological advancements that will happen, which is selling and advertisements and all that kind of stuff. And then it struck me that books are almost the last bastion. They have advertising for other books within their publishing, but they can't be interrupted by advertising yet.
And
I thought that was really interesting that this was verging on that, where it was almost like, I'm going to give you two channels. I'm going to give you this channel here, and then the other. I don't particularly like it, but I thought it was interesting. And I guess it gets really interesting.
Also, 170 pages seems quite short. To me, that's not a novel. But a lot of people, what some people call novels these days, particularly in the self-publishing space, and it's like they're like it's like the real low page count for novels.
And I guess even for things like an annual list, right? Like it would be a fascinating thing, and I am by no means saying that's what's happened in this instance, just to clear that up. But it wouldn't be a fascinating thing if you've got that list spot and that this is now an annual thing where this author kicks into that spot. And for whatever reason, what's delivered is different, or there's challenges with the book, and you've got an annual list to fill and you've got a book that's needed for that spot. It must be interesting to unpack. I mean, you'd hope at each time it would go back until the work was done, but it's an interesting thing to think about, to say the least. So I guess the other question I have for you, if someone was to ask you, I guess we've talked about what you write. If someone was to ask, I guess you've probably already answered it, but what the connecting factors you feel are across your work and why you do what you do. You mentioned telling stories. Do you think there's anything bigger than that in terms of like an existential sense of it? Do you see it as like a job of reaching readers and that's what you do, or is there other stuff outside of that?
Yeah, it's about primarily it's the whole writing to entertain and to reach people. And there's nothing better than the feeling of getting an email from someone like overseas who's been moved by one of your books. I had a guy from San Francisco email me once. He just read Aurealis and Ditmar, which is my fourth book, and there's quite a prominent death in that book. And he told me that he was in the middle of a restaurant waiting for a friend, and he read this death in the book, and he started crying in the middle of the restaurant. Wow. And the waitress came over and asked him if he was okay. And when I got that email, I was just like, oh my God, that's amazing. Like, I'm sorry that you cried, but at the same time, that's just like, I was like cheering, going, yes, I made someone cry. The other side of the world. And I had another young woman from Adelaide who said she'd been going through a hard time. And my fifth book in the Aurora series, Aurora Eden, is what got her through. And yeah,
Wow.
just emails from all over, and that just is amazing that you can get people to feel something and move them.
I think that's
So
amazing. And I think like I'm really enjoying having this conversation with you in the sense that WA kind of has a literary scene, and it does have obviously things like they have like a conference for speculative fiction over this way. Is that where things
yeah,
like
SwanCon. Yep.
the SwanCon? Yeah, exactly right. So there is a community here, but I do wonder how much WA gets, how incredible that kind of space is. Like it feels like there's lots of literary things set up to celebrate that and celebrate poetry and literary fiction. And yet, in one of those sort of ironies that exist in this world, certain types of genres, it's almost like the West doesn't have the capacity to support it. And so, like you find your way to the UK with Angry Robot, and
Yeah.
sell in that field, find somewhere else that gets it. So, I mean, kudos to you, I guess, to finding
It
that.
is, and I've been trying to figure out why that is, and whether again that's a snobbery thing, or whether people just don't understand a lot of the genre. Like crime always does well because crime always gets picked up at literary festivals, but WA is very literary focused. And so it is hard for genre writers to get any traction here, but we can get traction over east, overseas, but it's hard to get traction in our own state.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is like when it comes to science fiction, a lot of people just think it's aliens and spaceships, which couldn't be further from the truth. I actually do a presentation on science fiction, and I go through how science fiction is a big umbrella term. And if you kind of think of an umbrella with all the spokes at the bottom, and all those little spokes are all the subgenres of science fiction, which can range from your hard science fiction all the way over to the other side, which we kind of call the hand wave to science fiction, where there's science fiction concepts, but whether they're plausible, that's another thing. We don't let plausibility get in the way of a good read, you know. But, you know, there's so many different subgenres of science fiction, and people who like one kind of science fiction won't necessarily like another kind. So if someone likes cyberpunk, they may not like post-apocalyptic or, you know, and everything's covered in there. There's science fiction romance, there's, you know, science fiction horror, there's a lot of blends. And so I think people just don't understand. They just think it's aliens and spaceships and oh, no, or it's going to be hard science fiction. And that can turn a lot of people off if they think it's, oh, no, it's going to be all, I don't want to feel like I'm reading a textbook. But so much of science fiction isn't that.
And so what's next for Amanda Bridgeman? I understand there's something that you can kind of talk about, but we'll put it in general terms.
Okay. So, well, actually, if people want a free anthology of sort of action horror stories,
Cool.
Cohesion Press have just released, if you sign up to their newsletter, you can get a free anthology of 7 stories. Okay. I have a short story in there.
Yep.
So you can either go to the Facebook page or onto their website and you just sign up and you'll get the book straight away.
It's the Cohesion Press.
Cohesion Press, yep. And so it's a bunch of international authors in there. There's 7 stories. But I also have a novella in the works. It's another media tie-in property. I can't say who it is yet or what it is, but I can say it's a novella, and I'm just waiting to get the edits back, actually, waiting for did they like it? Did they like what I've written?
Oh, that's super exciting, Amanda. I'm very much looking forward to hearing more news about the novella and to reading it in due course. But in the meantime, all that's left for me is to say thank you so much for your time, Amanda. It's great to talk more and to learn so much more about, I guess, a whole other area of WA Lit in this state.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here, and it was great to be a part of the Perth Writers Festival as well, to kind of fly the flag for genre in WA. So thank you.
Yeah, may it always continue. Thanks again,
May it
Amanda.
continue.